The 60s were like the golden age of sex. Probably started with the birth control pill and Playboy magazine. And between the birth control pill and the advent of AIDS, there was a bubble in there where you could just your brains out nicely.
We were saying no more hypocrisy. That was the change, really. And the media was a much bigger part of it than anyone believes.
Who love money, there are hippies who love love.
People were all discussing alternative ways of living, and a lot of artists in those days used to push the envelope.
Things that caught my interest by the time I started writing movies were marijuana, abortion, marriage, adultery.
The sexual revolution was underway, and extramarital sex was a natural follow-on to this cultural phenomenon. With that came a lot of moralizers.
There was a war. It was a cultural war, and you had to choose sides, and it was a fun war. It was a war of performance almost.
There are so many factors that shape the whole baby boom part of the sexual revolution. By sheer numbers alone, it's a revolution unto itself. That and the fact that they were going to go out there and actually change things using the paradigm of the civil rights movement.
The civil rights movement really showed the way. I mean, it was the master plan. Martin Luther King, through nonviolent protest, literally had a huge impact on society, and that became the role model for almost all the groups that followed.
When the war in Vietnam became part of this equation, kids were forced to make another choice. Just like they were going to make a choice about sexuality, now they were going to have to make a choice about how they felt about this war.
As Vietnam started escalating, people were saying, make love, not war. And sex became actually a weapon.
You know, chicks go topless, guys go topless. Why not chicks? Get an even sentence. As far as the National Guard, it's teasing.
But shouldn't there be some respect for the sensibilities of respectable middle-class citizens?
Well, like I said before, if they don't like it, they don't have to look.
As the anti-war movement really begins gathering steam, and you have these groups like the Yippies, it was always about how they were going to outrage the bastions of traditional sexual morality, because that was the most incendiary thing they could think to do.
Abbie Hoffman is an expert at using theater to get coverage in the media. So before the demonstration at the Pentagon in October 1967, he made up a drug just to take off on the police spray mace. He called it lace. The pitch was that this was an instant aphrodisiac, and Abbie called for a press conference.
We're going to do a lot of freaky things. We're going to get the Pentagon to rise in the air. We're going to throw psychedelic bombs like the one at the end of the table. We're going to bring that down to the Pentagon. We're going to do things like that.
They were told that there are going to be hundreds of these water pistols with lace in it that would be sprayed on the National Guard and the Washington police. I was shocked that people believed it, but the reporters wrote about it, that got sent over the wire service. I don't think we ever bought the water pistols and the lace. I don't think that was necessary because they were afraid. They told undercover cops to watch out for people who looked like they were going to start in the streets. Literally, this was make love, not war.
What more fun is it to do as a teenager than being at a riot? I loved it. You could get laid at a riot.
I think in the 60s, everything became a part of everything else. But even though things seemed to be changing at an amazingly rapid pace, at the same time, it was business as usual, and things were exactly the same in the policies of traditional America. And it seemed like another planet.
The conflict between the law and reality has resulted in a national dilemma. Only recently have our abortion laws been openly questioned.
In my opinion, it's murder.
This is simply puritanical punishment.
A child, from the very moment of conception, is a human being.
It still was illegal to get information about contraception. It still was illegal to distribute contraceptives. I think that that's what makes Bill Baird such an interesting character.
He's William Baird, the founder of the Parents' Aid Society. He has a van, a kind of clinic on wheels, and a determination to advance the cause of birth control.
What made you this dedicated to birth control?
I had personally witnessed a young mother dying, and I felt that had she been taught the proper methods of birth control, that life may have been spared. When we realize in this nation alone, there's over 1 million abortions a year, and yet no one is concerned with going out into the communities to aid these people.
You have to remember, wealthy people could fly to Puerto Rico to get the abortion. What did poor people do? Poor people had to use coat hangers and knitting needles. And I said, this is a violation, but they're basic civil rights. So I purchased a 25-foot mobile van, and I went from poor area to poor area, and these people came in, and I taught them.
I'd like to tell you about the newer and better methods of birth control, Charlie, that really work. May I? Sure. The cream...
We went from town to town with this van, distributing birth control.
The idea is that these are the newer methods that will help you have a baby when you want to have a baby, or else prevent you from having one if you don't want to have one.
And everywhere he went, the police showed up, and they arrested him, and then they threw him in jail for a night, and then he'd be back out there with his van.
But at that time, students at Boston University heard about me. 800 kids signed a petition saying, Bill Baird, would you come challenge a law called Crimes Against Chastity, Morality, and Decency and Good Order? And it carried with it a 10-year prison term. And I said to myself, gee, maybe the Supreme Court would hear me. And I challenged the law.
It was illegal to display birth control in the state of Massachusetts. It was illegal to buy or sell birth control in many other states at the time. And he distributed birth control to students in the audience.
It is their personal morality, their personal right to decide whatever they wish to do with these contraceptives. And on that thinking, I am turning this over to them.
Thank you.
And the police showed up, and they arrested him, threw him in jail.
My strategy was, I knew I'd be arrested, but being arrested was a news story. So I used the media of my arrest to create the climate for change, which, believe it or not, influences judges.
The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in a ruling, the court stated that the government had no business intruding into the private lives of people insofar as matters of procreation were concerned. That ruling would be cited numerous times in the case of Roe v. Wade.
The tremendous significance to this nation is for the first time in our history, they finally agreed with us that single women and men do have the right to birth control. They do have the right to control their bodies.
So now what you had were people going out into the streets and changing sexual attitudes, changing laws and policies. But of course, the sexual revolution would mean different things to different people.
Right here is the amateur conference about the podcast. The newest procedures of law.
And America being the classic capitalist nation, you can't discount how profit pushed the sexual revolution as well.
Los Angeles and San Francisco have given a new dimension to the word topless. The topless phenomenon may be just one more assault on the conventional morality. It also may be tied to the acquisitive instinct, another way of making money.
In America, we have the concept, all types of ideas come into the marketplace. And if you as American citizens like it, you spend your money. If this type of conduct is offensive to the citizens of America, they won't spend their money.
The old famous saying, sex sells. You know, you really see it begin to happen in the 1960s. Hefner, for example, is at the peak of his success. He's flying around the world in his Playboy jet with the bunny logo on the tail. But it's not just Playboy. It goes everywhere into the media in Madison Avenue.
The secret of a dress like this is never look down, because if you do, you'll go home.
It's very, very feminine, and I'm very happy, very pleased that they have these low necklines.
People begin to understand how now we can use sex to market products in a way that had never really happened before.
I just used what's probably the best deodorant around, 5-day pads. They're a little bit stronger. Each pad has more antiperspirant than any other leading deodorant. Now, zip me up.
Does she or doesn't she?
Does she or doesn't she? Hair color so natural, only her hairdresser knows for sure.
Does she have sex even though she's not married, or doesn't she? At the time, it was suggestive, it was titillating. Madison Avenue knew how to use sex to market products, and it was everywhere. It was just part of mainstream culture.
There is only nudism. I mean, that's the only pure escape from fashion. Nudism.
People were now pushing all the limits in art, in literature, in film, in music. Everybody was saying, let's see how much we can get away with.
There had been a genre called sexploitation, and these films were legal, but they were kind of on the margins of Hollywood. They had a lot of nudity, usually just female nudity.
They could never show male genitalia. Whenever they got into the shot, the cameraman would yell out, "Pickle," you know, and that meant they had to reshoot it. So it was a little difficult.
You'd see volleyball games. Well, they could show it if it was the least sexual thing. Believe me, I saw a lot of volleyball games.
These films would be shown in smaller kinds of theaters, but nevertheless, sexploitation thrived during the 1960s, and sometimes doing it with a feature-length story. Russ Meyer made sexploitation.
Ladies and gentlemen, go for a wild, wild ride with the Watusi cats. But beware, the sweetest kittens have the sharpest claws. For your own safety, see faster, pussycat. Kill!
Russ Meyer gave you lots of simulated sex, and it was always about sex.
You girls a bunch of nudists, or you just short of clothes?
Tough women, fast cars, fast editing, big breasts, and a lot of high energy.
It was kind of radical, because here it was on film. Suddenly you could see things you'd never been able to see before in a public place with other people. You know, it was exciting, it was thrilling.
You got two of everything, and some left over.
At the same time that the exploitation filmmakers are making their nudie cuties, art house theaters are beginning to happen, and they're showing the French New Wave. And the only reason Americans were interested in the French New Wave at all was because of Brigitte Bardot.
Bardot at her bare, bold, and brazen best.
French New Wave, the Italians, Sophia Loren, all of these films were sexy.
The foreign films are what changed Hollywood because they were smart, they were well done, and they had nudity in them. And you could get away with nudity in a foreign language if there were subtitles. That was the first way that eventually the barriers became to come down, because they would take them to court and they would win because they would be socially redeeming. And that was the thing that you had to prove.
The Europeans had always had a corner on the market of showing adult sexuality because the Hollywood Production Code, which was in force until 1967, was really forcing American movies to remain rather adolescent in their representation of sexuality.
It's not normal for two natural, healthy people to live together like this without sex. That's
You
why.
keep bringing sex into the discussion, Dave. We agreed not to.
You weren't allowed to have people in double beds. You could only show these absurd twin beds.
Audiences were changing. People started wanting real people in real situations. No more la-di-da running hand in hand in through the waves of the beat. It was a lot of fun doing all of that, but it was a lot of BS, you know, just total nonsense.
As soon as the production code that had been in place since the 1930s is done away with, Hollywood begins wrestling with how far they're going to be able to go in talking about and in showing sex. And while the Hollywood films of that time do not explicitly convey sex, what they do is embrace sexual themes in ways that are very powerful and that had never been done before. And then you have films like The Graduate.
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me.
And Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
We want you and Mom to state absolutely clearly that you have no objections whatever, and that when we do get married, we'll have your blessing.
And the entire film is about the very sort of issues and questions that the Supreme Court would have to wrestle with in adjudicating the case of Loving versus Virginia, which was the case of a black woman who had fallen in love with a white man and could not marry because of the miscegenation law.
It wasn't in 1967 that they finally challenged the Virginia law. It took 100 years after the Civil War just to have interracial marriage finally validated in all 50 states.
So the same year that the law is struck down, Hollywood produces a landmark motion picture which reflects changing values and realities.
Do you mean have we been to bed together? I don't mind you asking me that. We haven't. He wouldn't.
As the sexual revolution progresses, of course, Broadway gets more sexual. Plays like Oh, Calcutta, where people get naked.
People start showing up by the busloads. Housewives from the Midwest come to New York just to see Oh, Calcutta, a Broadway show where people are doing skits about masturbation and orgasm.
What are you doing, you maniac?
It's role reversal time!
This had to have changed the way they viewed their own lives.
Do you think it should be legal for nude bodies to be shown on the stage? If they're good looking, yes.
Why not? If they like it, let them have it.
Sexual functioning is a tremendously important part of every individual's life. I suppose we spend more conscious thought, more time in conscious thought relative to our sexual functioning than any other physiologic process.
If Kinsey was the sexual luminary of the 1940s and 50s, a husband and wife couple became the sexual superstars of the late 60s and early 70s, and their names were Masters and Johnson. William Masters was a medical doctor, and his assistant, Virginia Johnson, whom he later married, co-wrote two landmark books. The first one was called Human Sexual Response, and it came out in 1966, and then Human Sexual Inadequacy, which came out in 1970.
Masters and Johnson studied the orgasm. They used these transparent plastic dildos to show the different stages of a woman's orgasm.
Couples would go to the Masters and Johnson clinic and have sex while Masters and Johnson watched them or had electrodes on them so that they could measure their heartbeat.
They pretty much proved that the female orgasm originated in the clitoris. And there was a great deal of talk about, was the orgasm clitoral, was the orgasm vaginal?
Suddenly it was like, hello, America. Welcome to the female orgasm. Masters and Johnson represented that the clitoral orgasm was not only better, but it was capable of multi-orgasms. Not only did it put women's sexuality forefront as a major national news story, but now it becomes this whole fuel for the sexual power of women.
Meet the most beautiful creature of the future.
If you look at the movie Barbarella, it was like taking Masters and Johnson's idea and running with it.
Barbarella is a 5-star, double-rated astronavigatrix Earth girl whose specialty is
Love.
The orgasm machine was kind of about that in a very sort of kinky, perverse way.
Jane Fonda is captured by the villain Duran Duran, who puts her in his excessive machine. And the idea is that the villain will, by playing the notes on this machine, force her to have such an orgasm that she will die of pleasure. So what happens is she just keeps having more and more and more pleasure, and the machine starts to fizzle and to smoke and to flame, and the machine is ruined. So the woman's body, in its capacity for pleasure, outdoes the machine. And it's wide-eyed Jane showing you the face of female orgasm.
I saw Barbarella, yes. And I remember the orgasm machine. That was very popular. We all wanted one.
By the late 1960s, there were more people than ever before that were interested in erotic materials. And they were more available than ever before.
Curiosity appears to be the prime motivation of Frenchie's customers. His store offers a unique course in human anatomy.
These are what you call conversation pieces, right?
Yes, they are rubber novelty. And you can always, if you finish talking about them and you don't like your partner, you hit him over the head with it.
Suddenly, the older people were looking at the younger people with their pot and their drugs and their music and their tie-dye T-shirts and their braless forms. And there was a certain amount of jealousy. I've heard guys my age still upset that they were born 20 years too soon. Why weren't they in on this?
They wanted a piece of the action, so to speak. And sex became a form of recreation, not very different than cooking a gourmet meal or swapping sexual partners with the couple down the street.
Married people, when the sexual revolution hit at the height, I guess led to swingers, which I found terribly unattractive.
What's our favorite evening game? Night baseball? Oh, baby, you're all wet. Let's swap partners is the name. Suburban roulette.
When I was growing up, swing was big band music. It eventually became a euphemism for multi-partner sex.
Suburban roulette.
We all thought the solution to marital boredom was swapping or open marriage.
I got divorced in '65, and I had this new boyfriend, and he was as curious about sex as I was. And that was about the time when there was a couple of newspaper articles where they were talking about group sex. And the minute I heard the word, I thought, that's what I want to do. So we went to our first party together and never looked back. And that's when I got my first experience with what I called democratic sex. It was mind-boggling. And as far as I was concerned, it was a spiritual experience.
While the suburban couples were swinging in this kind of very tentative way, in New York, San Francisco, swinging had a different quality to it. It was considered political almost, hip in the sense of really trying to transform society.
As people search for a safety valve in a world that's become a pressure cooker, at Esalen on the Pacific coast of California, they're reaching for a kind of heaven on earth that's sometimes idealistic, always controversial. Here they say there's peace and quiet, also love and happiness.
It's really fascinating to look at Esalen because there were people who went there looking for a way of being more sexually in tune with themselves, more willing to experiment, more about how to make it harmonize with mind, body, and spirit. And all of these new things became part of the agenda there.
People were looking for some kind of magic cure. If I go to Esalen, if I go to Big Sur, if I rush out and hug people, this will somehow make me happy. This will take care of all those things that obviously all of my worldly goods are not taken care of.
Get in touch with all those fans in you.
They're mostly moneyed middle-class men and women searching for answers to personal problems, hoping to find some solution in what are called encounter groups. It's not that they're maladjusted. Most of them are too well-adjusted. Esalen tries to release them.
If you look at the film Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, it's interesting because it really begins at Esalen.
When it came time for the Bob and Carol stuff, I actually went to and experienced the Esalen experience, which was being with a dozen people in a 48-hour marathon. We're led by somebody who asked, "Why did you come here?" And many of the things that are in the movie happened there. One woman said, "I'm here because I want a better orgasm."
This couple, played by Robert Culp and Natalie Wood, go to Esalen and they come back determined to bring that into their normal kind of relationship and sexual lives. And they begin experimenting.
Hi, Bob.
Hi. That's a pretty girl.
How is she?
The Diane Cannon character has visceral reaction to the knowledge that these two dear friends have had affairs with other people.
The point is not that he told her. The point is that he did it. That he cheated on his wife. That he cheated on Carol.
I agree, that's bad. But I think you'll agree with me that if he hadn't told her, there'd be no problem.
The story has a lot of fun with how the squares are going to get on board with this.
I think she just felt like if you can't beat them, join them. When they started that foursome idea, she was doing it just to be hip and fun.
Really, what happens is they just don't do anything. But just the fact that they're somehow all in bed together with their clothes off makes the point. This is what people were really trying to do.
Sex became kind of integrated into the fabric of upper middle class life. And it was available, it was open in a way it never had been before. People took the ideas really seriously. They were really grappling with what is it to be a sexually liberated person? What is it to live an authentic life? And this was a time where people wanted not just sex, but good sex.
All over the world, there's a demand for that. And we have the technology to help people have that.
After their book about female sexuality, Masters and Johnson go to work on a major work about human sexual inadequacy. That entire book addressed the things that caused people to have bad sex lives.
The goal was to train sex therapists so that there would be a new profession of sex therapists who would kind of replace the old marriage counselor to help couples work through their sexual issues. One of the things they would do with couples is they would provide sexual surrogates. Say you're a man and you're suffering from impotence. Well, if your wife can't do the trick, they would provide a surrogate, a young woman who would help you learn how to have an erection and keep your erection.
It's the most interesting work I can find to do right now. I feel like I'm learning an awful lot. It's very well paid. That's another reason. I'm sure that there are many people around who think that sex for money means prostitution. But I feel like whereas prostitution's the oldest profession, I think sex therapy of this type is the newest.
What's interesting is that it wasn't as controversial as it might even have been, say, 10 years before. It was at that point reflective of the culture. Having a good sex life is as important as having a fulfilling job, as important as having fulfilling hobbies. People wanted their lives to be satisfying.
Now it was going to be about what kind of sex I was going to have, when I was going to have it, how I was going to have it, how good it was going to be. Now sex was going to become fused with everything that was going on.
Lots of things can be called the key moments in the sexual revolution, but probably the heyday was the late 60s. The baby boomers were in college, they had the pill, and it just became about doing your own thing. Only there were rules against it.
There were happenings, there were beings, there were love-ins, but at Barnard College in 1968, you still couldn't have a guy in your room. You couldn't live with a guy off campus.
I remember when I was at Cornell, guys could live wherever they wanted. Women, and we were supervised. We had to live in dormitories and check in at 10:30 at night.
The whole idea of a college had been, especially for young women, that it was an institution that played the role of parents. But at Barnard College in New York, which is a college for women, there was a young woman, and her name was Linda LeClaire. And she was living with her boyfriend, Peter Baird.
Peter and I knew the rules, so I said to Barnard that I was working as a nanny. And I filled out all the forms, and I said I was living off campus.
Definitely against the rules. When the media got wind of it, they blew it into a big deal because it was like, my God, this is scandalous.
Linda, how long have you and your young man been cohabitating?
Peter and I have been living together since May of '66, about 2 years now.
And are you thinking about marriage?
No, we don't believe that our relationship need be authorized by law.
It was happening everywhere. This happened to be the one case that went into the media.
School career is in jeopardy, Linda. Think it's that important?
I think that this is terribly important. I couldn't at this point give it up and begin studying.
You know, they were looking for someone to still get rid of me. So they threw me out at the end of the year for not completing the semester.
It seemed that draconian measures, and it became a national conversation over the sexuality of girls in their late teens and what's the role of college in our society.
I think it's something that all students have been waiting for, a spark to set off the issue of housing rules and who has the authority, whether it's the school's authority or the individual's right to choose where he wants to live.
I think steps should be taken to change the law. Perhaps, this will bring attention to the situation.
In the end of the day, it was collectively decided it wasn't the college's job to be telling college students who they could live with and who they could sleep with.
I think Linda LeClaire did have a feminist perspective about what was happening to her because she saw it as an issue of equality at the same time as an issue of freedom.
Part of utopianism for me at that age was really being able to make decisions for myself. Sexual decisions, emotional decisions, life decisions.
The women of the New Left came with this background in education thinking they were going to be real equals, but they get subtly demoted to wives and girlfriends, note takers and coffee makers.
What you want, baby, I got it. What you need, do you know I got it?
The equality thing was really mythological. You'd go to the meetings about the war or whatever, and have us girls go make the coffee and mimeograph the things and sit back and be admiring. And you have to listen to the guy talk about his theories on, the war and all that stuff until it was like, okay, can we have sex now?
R-E-S-P-C-T, find out what it means to me. R-E-S-P-C-T.
In 1968, the women's movement was just a few people sitting around talking about their dissatisfactions with the guys in their lives, stuff like that.
Always talk about him. Why can't you talk about me? I mean, I'm there. It takes two to have a date.
And the leftist women were always on our case. How could these women sit around and talk about themselves when the ghettos are burning and Vietnam is burning? So they were always attacking this new feminism, saying, what do you do besides sit around and bitch? What are your actions? So somebody said, why don't we demonstrate against the Miss America contest and challenge that view of women? So about 100 women showed up in Atlantic City.
It was not against the contestants, it was against the contest and the idea that how you looked became the determinant of whether you got a scholarship to college or not. So there was a demonstration against the Miss America meatpacking contest.
Same old game, you never change. Always rapping about the same old thing.
They put an ash can on the Atlantic City boardwalk and dumped bras and steno pads and aprons and all kinds of symbols of stereotypical female roles into it, which they were going to burn, but they never did because they couldn't get a fire permit.
I think there may have been a couple of women in other cities who said, oh, this is the women's movement, I'll burn my bra. But it was never anything that people really did. And over the years, I'll speak to a reporter who'll say, well, do you remember those years when you burned your bra? And I said, I never burned my bra. And they say, yes, you did.
Is the bra slipping? Does support of women's lib necessarily mean non-support of anything else? Well, there's no doubt about it. We do live in a period of increasing liberation. And to a lot of women, that means liberating the body, freeing it from all those artificial restraints that have kept it hemmed in and uptight.
Bras? I really think anybody can do whatever they want to. Me personally, no, depending on what I'm wearing, of course. For me, no bra.
You look fine without one. I wear one. If the weather is cold, put one on. In the 1960s, there was this total rediscovery of the body. Let's take off our clothes, let's do LSD, let's get into hot tubs. It was an opposition to everything that puritanical America had stood for.
It's important to remember that throughout the 60s, there were efforts to stop the sexual revolution. There were people who didn't like it, who felt threatened by it, who wanted to do everything they could to halt change.
By destroying the faith in God, dignity of man and family, they destroyed the foundations of a free society.
You already saw what was going to happen. No sooner did you have the counterculture and its open, provocative sexual values than you have a reaction to it.
What's the point in going around dirty? Do these people bathe?
Are they dirty?
Yes, half of them smell so bad. I don't want to stand it.
It wasn't just the hippies, it was a whole range of things. As soon as people wanted to start teaching sex education in school, for example, there were people against it.
I would propose to rename sex education. It should be called what it really is, programmed perversion.
The whole issue becomes like this linchpin of the culture war.
This is a much more fundamental fight than the fight about sex education. This is a fight about who shall determine the quality of life in this society.
It was also a counter-reaction to the provocative imagery in movies, the relaxed standards on television, the books that had become so free, and the flourishing in places like Times Square of what had been an underground culture of smut.
We've taken God out of our schools and put all of this in. And I think America is in for the judgment of God unless we turn around and change our way of living.
All of this was happening right at the time that Richard Nixon had come into office as the guy who was going to turn the tide.
When hardcore pornography is permitted to corrupt the minds of children,
then the time has come for new moral leadership to make itself felt in America.
But there were so many things going on in culture at the end of the 60s that you can just see how impossible it is to try to roll back the sexual revolution.
Today, anything goes, absolutely anything.
In movies, you have Midnight Cowboy, the first X-rated Hollywood feature, becoming the best picture. People are thinking about sex more. They're more comfortable with sex. They're speaking the language of sexuality.
Mr. Graham, I read that you don't believe in premarital sex relations. Is this true?
It's not a matter of what I believe, it's what the Bible teaches. And the Bible teaches that premarital sex relations are wrong.
Yeah, that's funny. To me, that would be like, like driving a car, getting a driver's license without a learner's permit first.
Did people's behavior change? Yes, but it changed more in the fact of openness. Suddenly you could celebrate nudity and drugs and, rock and roll.
You see the counterculture completely peak at Woodstock. When that happened, all America looked at it and said, wow, these kids have really created a kind of alternative culture for themselves.
We found a way to establish our own generation standards and make ourselves different the way each generation does. And we were pretty damn happy. And it involved lots of sex.
You have now a generation, the baby boomers, that has moved into the demographic center and a culture of rock that has become completely in your face and outrageous. Sex is out of the closet. And by the end of the 1960s, you have women organizing and early stirrings of gay liberation. When those things happened, you just knew it. The cat was out of the bag. And all hell was going to break loose.
We are coming from the power of love, and that will sustain us. For we must be free, we will be free, we shall be free, because we are everywhere.